Alright, another draft physics presentation. I don't know what to categorize this as. It's not really a comments video, but it's just one guy's comments. And it's on one subject. And it's a subject been over before. And it's just about math gimmick. So maybe that's what I'll just title the video. Because this is just a bullshit argument. I mean, they say there's a God, then they put their own God in the math, and then they say, look, the math says God exists. No, you put God in the math. You made up a fake function and stated that you know somehow that's how the real world works. So it has to do with this stupid length contraction thing. So you can't make the argument, they just won't let you make the argument that there's absolutely no evidence that any of this takes place. You just invented a function and stated that you know that this function happens, and therefore you can't just add 2 plus 2 equals 4. You have to say, oh, it's length contracted, so the 2 wasn't really a 2, and so therefore it's not 4. It's just a contrivance. And you know, you can keep arguing it. There's no point in arguing. You have to believe their contrivance. They have no evidence for it being a fact. They just claim it. It's a fact. You have to accept it as a fact. We say so, period. And they're just so persistent in doing this. It's just obnoxious. Prove that it happens, and then you can tell me I have to have a formula for the thing that actually happens, not the thing you invented and said it happens. Alright, let me make the argument for him, since his video was indeed muddled. Well, his statement was clear. I don't care what the causes are. I point out in the video, frankly to you even, how this whole conversation about length contraction on one path is irrelevant. Doesn't even matter if that happens. Doesn't even matter if the length is different. I'm telling you, the pattern is created by only one of the paths of the interferometer existing. You don't need two paths for the light to travel. And you can get exactly the same pattern. You haven't dealt with that fucking argument that what you think the experiment is doing is not what the experiment is doing. And you're not accounting for any of that. So there's no point in me proving it, no point in me doing the experiment on my porch, demonstrating it. You people just keep pretending it's not true. So what's the point in arguing with you? You're fanatics. You won't deal with the argument on the table, and you just keep pretending this is about something else. I'm telling you, I did the experiment without the extra arm. So this isn't about any kind of comparison about an arm not moving and an arm moving. Idiot. I mean, fuckhead. I mean, really, it just doesn't take that much work to pay attention to the video, pay attention to the arguments made in the video, and actually counter the arguments made in the video. And instead forcing me to make an argument again that I've made numerous times before, that in this case is completely irrelevant to the experiment I performed on my porch. Alright, on the forward trip. The forward trip is only means something, this trip, forward and then back, only means something in your wacky theory if this arm exists to compare it to. If this arm doesn't exist, what's the difference about any difference? How would your interferometer measure the difference between this going this way was longer than coming back this way? How could it possibly create interference? If this leg doesn't exist, how is it possible? What are you comparing it to? Can you understand the argument? Anyway, the photon has to catch up to the mirror that is receding away, so that will take a longer distance time to travel. So again, he says the distance is longer because the mirror is moving away. And that, you know, frankly, you can say, well, that seems to make sense. Yes, the mirror is moving away. But so was the thing that emitted the photon, and the thing that's going to receive the photon is going to move towards at exactly the same rate that the thing moved away. So again, this is just bullshit. Anyway, so it will take longer distance time to travel. The overall distance will not be any different. So again, I'm just going to keep arguing. It can't be any different. On the backward trip, the photon is moving head-on into the target beam splitter that is coming towards it, so it will take a smaller distance time to travel. This is just about again the redshift, so I might as well do it now. We'll go over this one more time. So annoying. Alright, maybe I'll use two colors. I don't know if I'll need them. So the idea is It's like sound. So as I pointed out, you have a thing that's emitting, and it's moving while it's emitting. So if you understand the photons as I do, that is, they're made out of individual bits with a frequency, okay? The wavelength is their frequency, the period between their arrival. So you could say, okay, it emits one now. Alright, so this is the what now is to it. Now if it stays stationary, okay, the next photon will be released at the same location. Alright, this one will have traveled a fixed distance, and it'll have a new one, and this will be its wavelength. If the thing is moving, then you can understand that it will be releasing the next little ton a little forward of where it released it the last time. So it's going to end up, when it does its forward thing, it's going to end up tightening the frequency difference between them. So instead of this being the frequency, some much smaller frequency will be the frequency, because this one will have maintained some of this one's velocity. So the two will have a tighter frequency. They'll be compressed. So in a sense, it's just like sound. And the opposite thing happens when the receiver is receiving. So if one photon, if it's stationary, the photon hits, and then there's a fixed amount of time, and then the other photon gets there and hits. But if this thing's moving away, then the first photon hits, and this thing will be moving away while this one's trying to catch up, and so it's going to take a longer amount of time for the second photon to hit the target because it's moving away. And those two things, as isolated events, will exactly undo each other. So it's like I could be on a train going 100 miles an hour. Now if you're sitting across from me, okay, and you're moving 100 miles an hour, the truth is my sound got compressed, leaving me because I'm going 100 miles an hour, and you, because you're moving 100 miles an hour away from me, decompressed it. It's that simple. Now if you were standing outside the train, my voice would sound really high-pitched because the frequency is compressed and you're not moving away, so therefore you don't fix the compression. It's that kind of argument. The thing you do going one way, you undo going the opposite way. So the net amount of distance is exactly the same. You can't change the distance. It's a let's see. It's longer going and it's shorter coming back by exactly the same amount. It's the same distance. And the only way this could be relevant is if you say this leg's moving and this leg is not. And as I've pointed out in the experiment, this leg is not part of the experiment anymore. I get the interference pattern, I get the interferometer pattern with one leg. I don't need two legs. So explain how that happens and how it's completely different physics than your interference physics. Explain how you get exactly the same pattern. The pattern actually cycles. It does everything an interferometer pattern should do, and yet I've cut the leg right off. So why don't you explain how it's the same pattern, but somehow it's not the same. It's not being caused by the same thing. Your two-leg pattern is somehow a completely different pattern than the one created with only one leg. So what they're doing, so he's going to do his gibberish math, and it's the same thing I've complained about before, is they they multiply something by, they'll do this kind of thing, like they'll do length plus velocity, and then they'll put it over L squared C squared. And what this basically does is it creates a fraction. Well, it's 1. Okay, so 1 plus 1. So they are basically just fractionalizing something, and so they're turning it into a 0.99% to 0.0% of change. So well, you go from 1, let's say. Okay, the affinities are eliminated. So you eliminate 0, and 0 is still there, but you eliminate this going the number having any affinity problem. So this is an automatic limitation. It can't go more than 99% of 1. Or 100% of 1. Yeah, well, whatever. But it's just a contrivance. This is like a Lorentz transformation or anything else. This is just saying I'm going to impose a curve on distance, and I'm going to say when you go a longer distance, the curvature has a different length factor than when you go a shorter distance because of the curve. So it's, I don't know if this is perfectly analogous, but you could take a string and measure the string, not held taut, and as you change the distance, you get an exaggeration of the distance and the length of the string, and then how much drop it has. And you're saying, well, because this little movement this way creates this much drop, but when you move this way, it creates much less, much more contraction. And because those two things are different, somehow you can use that to say somehow the total distance you moved is different. When no, you moved the exact same amount of distance. The thing you're using to measure it exaggerates this versus that. So it thinks making it wider is proportionally more important somehow than making it narrower. So it's just a perversion of the reality. All right. I mean, I've used all kinds of analogies. I've pointed out that you take any two things and they're both moving away. You can just sit there and draw yourself a diagram. But again, this has to do with the phase of the light. So this whole thing is focused on this fact that the light has a frequency. And they say that frequency is somehow built into some wavy thing, and it's not this isn't a real thing with a length, or it's, who knows how they make frequency. But the point is that the frequency gets out of phase because the two things have a different compression. Now, but again, there's no two arms here. So clearly in this example, any compression, any lengthening, redshifting going this way will be exactly compensated by the blue shift going the other way. So this receiver is going to blue shift, this reflector is red shifting, and they're going to equal each other out. So you're going to end up with the one frequency of light. It's going to be exactly what was emitted is going to end up coming back, because the thing you're reflecting off of is going to completely undo the shifting. You're just incapable of addressing this simple argument that there's no reason to add any extra factors. Alright, the entire point, the entire point is you have a dogma and you insist that everybody accept your dogma even though you have absolutely no evidence that it exists. Alright, there's no length contraction. You don't have any evidence that it actually happens. It's something you made up. Okay? The entire point is that these two things don't cancel out. Well, they do. And my entire point is you have no evidence that they don't. Your evidence is your own made up fake formula where you multiply something times a fake 1 times L plus B divided by L squared C squared. You create a fake mechanism that doesn't have to exist at all. It's not a proven existing thing in real world. No one adds 2 plus 2 by, well, 2 divided by 1 plus 2 squared, 2 plus 2 divided by 2 squared plus 2 squared. Nobody does that. I mean, times 2 squared. Nobody does that because they know the 2 isn't going anywhere. It's not going to go infinite on them. So they don't need to do it. They don't need to apply bent space bullshit onto a simple equation. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Alright, the entire point is that these two things don't cancel out because of lengthening. Well, no, you mean contraction. So, right? It's not lengthening. It's length contraction is the factor, the bent space factor, the bent space-time factor of the distance on the forward trip. So again, the exact amount of distance is taken away on the return trip. So the extra distance you have to travel because the thing's running away is exactly the same amount as the distance you lose coming back. The two cancel each other out perfectly. Alright, of the distance on the forward trip also takes a longer time. It's irrelevant which one takes longer. Obviously it takes longer to do the forward trip than the return trip. But it doesn't matter because you're not comparing it to some other thing, idiot. It can't change the phase of the light. We're talking about red shift then converting with blue shift. The receiver is blue shifting what was red shifted. Anyway, time for to do so the photon is catching up. Let's see. Because of lengthening of the distance on the forward trip also takes a longer time to do so as the photon is catching up. It's not catching up, the target's coming towards it, so that doesn't even make any sense. But anyway, that's where your reasoning falls apart. No, your reasoning is vacant. There is no reasoning here. You're taking a very simple thing with where I don't need any extra variables. We know that the trip forward is this long and the trip backward is this long. And we know if they add those two up, it comes out to the same length of trip that if neither one of them were moving. There's no difference in the distance. So he says, let L be the length of the arm, V the velocity, light speed. Okay, so this is just simple stuff. Okay, C minus V. So he's using the speed of light, and so he's not going to pay attention to the distance difference. He's just going to use the speed of light plus this extra velocity that you're claiming you lose because you're going to travel less distance. But that's not what actually happens, right? We know the light doesn't gain or lose speed. So automatically this is like the wrong way to do the equation. We know the distance is what changes, not the speed. So he's changing the wrong variable, but it wouldn't even matter if he did it honestly. But he's going to do it in this sneaky way where he's going to change the velocity and then he's going to change the length. So he's going to change both variables. You can't do that. You have to either apply the change as it changed one thing. You can't change both things. Alright, so if the experiment were not moving, if it was moving, there's nothing wrong with any of this. Okay, simple L, and he has C minus V, C plus V. So exactly, you can see the equation right there. L, and you see everything is the same. The only thing you're changing is one is C minus V and C plus V. And the only V there is the conversion of the distance. So longer distance, you're saying it's moving slower because it moved longer, and then the shorter distance you're saying it moved faster because it's shorter. And again, they're going to be exactly the same numbers. The V's are going to be exactly the same. So it's just like saying C minus 2, C plus 2. So obviously 0. Let's plug in some numbers just like you wanted. Where did I say I just wanted to do that? Where in the video did I say I need to do any of this crap at all? I made the simple analogies. I made the simple comparisons. You're the one with some bogus bullshit thing that I have to accept your space-time as existing and that it's compressed. You don't have any evidence of it existing. You don't have any evidence that it's compressed, and yet you're saying I must accept that as a fact, a proven fact. It's not anywhere close to a proven fact. Okay, let's plug in some numbers, some fake numbers. For simplicity, we'll use seconds. Okay, fine. Again, so he does this little thing of playing with the numbers, and you know they use this equate thing. You know, we'll write the equation 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then we'll rewrite it as 2 minus 1 plus 2 plus 1, and somehow we've simplified it. No, that's not simplifying the formula. But anyway, so there's nothing here. Stationary case time equals 2L. Well, that's if you are recognizing that you're just pretending the length isn't changed. So 2L is now because you're using velocity instead of length, right? Okay. Divided by C equals 2 times 1 divided by 1 equals 2. Again, I don't know why we would make it even that complicated. I mean, if you have two L's, then you just say L plus L. If it's not moving, the distance is fixed. You have two L's, you just say, yeah, 2 L's equals 2 L's. 1 L plus 1 L coming back, 2 L. Done. Alright, for the moving case, and this is just completely made up. So here's the moving case. Time equals 1 divided by 1 minus 0.2. So he's using 0.2 as the velocity change. And he says plus 1 divided by 1 plus 0.2. So clearly it's plus, it's a minus 0.2 and then a plus 0.2. And now he changed, he says that somehow equals 1.25 plus 0.83333. Where do you get that from? It was 0.2. You put the number in. It says time equals 1 minus 0.02, and then it's 1 plus 0.02. So you didn't put in your gimmick. So you sit there saying, this is a real equation? How's it real? How are these two things on this? There's an equal sign there. How are these two equal? When it's already got, the variables are already filled in. It's 0.2, and this is 0.2. How could it possibly come out to be 1.25 plus 0.888333? How did 0.2 turn into 0.3333? How did 0.2 turn into 1.25? So there's nothing in here. You're just making a statement saying this is the math. That's not math. That's garbage. Okay, and we see that the two times are clearly not the same. Not by any rational formula. So then he takes a third try at it. I guess obviously he figured out this was crap. And he says, well, I need to do that again because that didn't make any sense, right? I guess. You can do this for any numbers with any units. Yes, you can rewrite equations completely irrationally and pretend that 0.2 equals 0.8333, but it doesn't. So anyway, this isn't some trick or anything. Yes, it is. It's explicitly, overtly crap. It's completely made up functions. You are saying something like V equals W times F, and there's no evidence that V equals W times F. You're saying that something's a fact that isn't a fact. Okay, it's literally what happens. It's exactly the opposite of literally what happens. It's completely figuratively what happens. There's actually no evidence that it literally happens that way. That any of these functions actually literally happen in the real world. They're just completely made up and you have no evidence for them. If you do some algebra on one of the formulas you get, so again, take a simple formula, right? And make it more complicated, and somehow that's good physics. So he takes something simple, right? L divided by C plus V, L divided by C minus V. Take something simple, and he says that equals all of this crap. And then somehow it equals this crap. And then somehow it equals this crap. So it was in its simplest form possible right there. And all of a sudden it's now in this complex form. And this is where you have the 1 minus V times V squared over C squared. So there's the 1 minus bullshit. So that's the gimmick right there. That's the, we're going to pretend there's a bent space factor and multiply it by a bent space factor. I don't have to accept that. I don't have to think that's rational. I don't have to think there's any reason to do that. There's absolutely nothing, in my opinion, in the experiment that indicates any of that crap happens. So that's just made up by you. You say that the two distances are somehow fundamentally different. That going forward has a different time factor times it than going backwards. And that you can't just say, yes, when I move this way, I took this much distance. And you're saying, well, in reality, though, when you move it back this way, going this way is different, and it's going to completely be a different number. And somehow it makes a difference. It doesn't make any difference. And if I move the whole experiment, it doesn't make any difference, because both the emitter and the receiver, or the reflector and the receiver, are moving the same. Whatever one takes away, the other one's going to give back. Okay, so he finishes up. This isn't some voodoo factor. Yes, it is. 1 minus v times v squared over c squared. 1 divided by 1, okay, minus v squared divided by c squared is garbage. Voodoo factor. That's your voodoo factor. The end. I mean, there's nothing I can say, right? You're just going to keep telling me it's the truth. It's the truth. You have, again, present your evidence that it's truth. Show something in the real world that's obeying that can't be explained with some other simple mechanical reasoning. And again, I'll go back to the drawing. Do it one more time. This has no meaning to the arguments I've made about what beam splitters and interferometers are doing, because there's no combining the two lengths. There's no theory of interferometers that say this length versus this arm. Their theory is that this arm is moving and this arm doesn't detect the movement because it's going up and down. So there can't be any phase shift in this arm because it's moving this way. It's not moving length, it's not length contracting in the same way because it's not going the same way as the momentum. So the argument of interferometers is what they're measuring is the fact that this length doesn't get longer or shorter, and that somehow this length gets longer and shorter. Even though, again, it can be pointed out that I can talk to somebody on a train moving 1,000 miles an hour, and somehow my sound will get to them in a normal condition. Yet if somebody's standing outside the train, not moving 1,000 miles an hour, they won't be able to perceive what I said at all. It'll just go, there, over, done. Because they won't uncompress it. Alright, so I'll go to the drawing just to sum up. This is just so fucking irritating. I have to go over the same stuff over and over. Never a response to what I've actually said. Just keep pretending it hasn't been said. Pretend I didn't do the experiment on my porch. I didn't demonstrate the argument I'm making. So this traditional bullshit argument, which I still say is bullshit, I mean, even done their way, okay? So you have a beam splitter, you have an emitter of light, you reflect one length, and you get it to go through to a receiver, and then the other length goes through, reflects off a mirror, and then goes back and reflects. And this is where they say the interference is taking place in this length. I've demonstrated that you can get rid of this whole arm altogether, so the whole red thing is gone, and I'll get the same pattern. I've demonstrated it. It happens. It's real. No other arm necessary. So you're not combining the red arm and the black arm. You're just combining the black arm with the black arm. That's it. There's nothing else happening. Alright, they keep pretending I didn't do the experiment. I did it. Okay, it's a fact. You can eliminate this entire thing from existing, and I'll get the same pattern just with this. So anyway, the traditional idea is like I said, if you move this whole experiment this way, you move the emitter, you move the mirrors, you move the beam splitter, it's all going the same 50 miles an hour. So their argument is that somehow, because you're moving it, this length is changed. So the distance, the time it takes the light to go from here to there and back is somehow different when you're moving. And it's not different. I first contend it isn't any different than the length going this way. This way. Okay, so they say that these two L's do not equal each other. And I'd say, first, that isn't even true. Okay? But if I was even to concede that, the point is, in the experiment I demonstrate on my porch, I'm not comparing this length to this length. That's not how I got the pattern. The pattern was created merely by having something go through and then reflect. And that's all that happened here. So I'm saying you don't have an explanation for that. And to make it worse, you're saying you don't need an explanation. That you get exactly the same pattern, functions exactly the same way as your made up notion that this leg somehow is important. Same exact pattern. So I'm just saying, what's different about your pattern and that pattern? If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So if there's any form of interference here, somehow it's not the interference of this length with this length. It's somehow this length is interfering with itself, which I obviously don't think that's the case. And as I pointed out, this is about reflections inside the beam splitter. The beam splitter is creating the pattern, and it's creating it through refraction. First, diffraction through a gradient of some kind, dust, dirt, or an actual gradient. And that diffraction increases the internal reflections, which create the pattern. The internal reflections come out at if it's a jagged line of internal reflections, right? You got two surfaces and you have internal reflections. You can sort of understand that if these internal reflections are released by a certain probability, that some will leave here, 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 and that's your ringed pattern. And where they're going to leave is completely dependent about where they come in. So how they get into the glass will decide where they come out of the glass. So you change the location of where they go in, you're going to change the location of where they go out. Alright. So anyway, so yeah, like I said, the fact that there's, again, this reverence for math, when math can be manipulated. And clearly he manipulated the math. He took a simple thing, C plus V and C minus V, and that this isn't what he was really doing. And again, the distance is the only thing that changes. You can't change the velocity. So the very fact that he was using velocity is idiotic when he should have just said the length. The length L1 going this way is greater than, L2. But it doesn't matter, because the overall length will be identical to the overall length traveled by something that's stationary. Without moving, it's going to be exactly the same. It's just like me being across the table from somebody moving the same speed as me. If the train stops, the distance between us isn't going to be any different. Now, you think it's going to be different because you believe in some kind of Einstein bullshit that somehow the faster I go, we got closer and closer together until we're, noses are touching. I mean, you believe in a fairy tale, in my opinion. Something completely unproven. So, what can I say? Sorry, I don't have to believe that. There's no evidence for it. And it's clearly not just straight up algebra. It's creating a mechanism and throwing it into the formula and saying, there, this is a real thing. It's not a real thing. No. What can you do? People are just belligerently unresponsive to the arguments that have been made. Belligerently unresponsive.